Welcome to Building Stories, the podcast where we tell honest stories about construction and digital construction. Today we have Jon Davies with us from the ACEA, the Australian Constructors Association. Jon brings with him 30 years of experience in the construction industry. He's passionate and an advocate for change, driven by the desire to ensure that every level of the industry is sustainable, resilient to boom and bust cycles, which we all know too well right now, and the industry is able to deliver the infrastructure that Australia and our society in general needs, and trying to do that in a collaborative and efficient manner. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jon. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Also, I've also got our co-host today. We've got David Broadhurst, also known as Brody, who's our chief evangelist here at Deep Space. How are you, Brody?
Yeah, how are you going? Good to connect everybody. Looking forward to the conversation.
And myself, my name is Sudishan, or Suds, and I'm the go-to-market lead here at Deep Space. So to kind of get into it, Jon, really keen to get our views to hear about yourself and your younger years. So really, talk to us about your journey in construction. Why did you choose to work in this industry, and what gets you up each morning?
Gosh, that's a question, a real loaded question, isn't it? I mean, as you can see, I have been in the industry for quite some time, and what got me into that, probably like a lot of people, it goes back to good old-fashioned things like Lego and building stuff that putting things together and being sort of proud about what you achieve, and that is I guess a constant throughout my career and throughout everyone's career in the construction industry. What attracts most of us in here, it's that fact that you are solving complex problems every day. You're building things that are going to be around, that you can bore your kids with and point to every time you drive past and say, I was on that job, and all of that sort of stuff. So that's probably where I got in. You can tell from the accent, originally from the UK. I did a degree in quantity surveying. I originally worked for a company called John Lang's, which famously went bust and was bought for £1 by Ray O'Rourke, and is now in its current form Lang O'Rourke. And I was very much into probably more civil construction than vertical construction. I quickly realised that I was keen to go overseas and try and see how things were constructed elsewhere. This was at the time when overseas, getting jobs overseas wasn't as easy as it is today. Today it's relatively straightforward actually to get overseas experience if that's what you want to do. Back in the day when I did it, it was all these job adverts, and they were. They really show my age here. These were adverts in papers, not adverts online, adverts in papers. And you'd see, previous overseas experience required, and you go, well, that's great. But how do you break into this? Anyway, it took a really shitty job, literally shitty job, to get my break that no one else wanted to go on, which was a project refurbishing Abu Dhabi's sewage pumping network that got me overseas, and I never went back. Ultimately, I've had time in there. I moved to Australia, expanding the international airport for the Olympics. Went to Singapore, worked as a claims consultant in Singapore for a period. Went back to the Middle East, went back to Dubai, just as the government there changed the law allowing foreigners to own property, which was the boom, like the blue touch paper moment where Dubai went nuts. Had all my kids, the three kids there, and we decided that we didn't really want them growing up thinking that was real life, because quite honestly, it's nothing like real life there. And that's when we decided to move back to Australia, where I've been ever since, 17 years now in Australia, largely working for major contractors, largely in the commercial space, but also latterly got into consulting, again, commercial space. But then after 30 odd years of contracts in commercial, which to be quite frank is this, day in, day out in our industry, it's just constant. I thought we need to change things. We need to see that there's a better way of doing things. And I'm reaching that sort of stage in my career where I can put some of my experiences to good use and really advocate for change. And was given an opportunity with Queensland Major Contractors Association back in the day. Then along came COVID and thought, we've really got a fantastic opportunity now. This is the thing, the catalyst potentially to achieving the changes that we're all looking for. Got onto the Australian Constructors Association because despite apologies to all people on this call that are from Queensland, it's not the centre of the universe. I know everyone that lives here thinks it's the centre of the universe, but trying to achieve change from here, it was limited ability to do that. So got on to the national body, Australian Constructors Association. What are you lot doing about this? And I said, well, funny you should say that. We've decided that we as an association need to be a bit more active. We need to be more outward focused. And we're just at the minute recruiting for a CEO. In fact, we've just shortlisted for a CEO, full-time CEO. But it's not too late. If you're interested in this, always remember this, Suds. Friday afternoon conversation where, I'll send you the details if you like. You might be interested. And I thought, right, here we go. Be careful what you wish for. Anyway, that was 4.5 years ago, and here I am still today, really passionate about that and enjoying the opportunity, hopefully, to achieve change in the industry.
It's really exciting, John, because I know me and you have spoken a number of times about a serendipity moment in time where if we can't bring about change during this season, we probably need a good kick up the arse. But out of all the things that you've mentioned, because I know you've covered off a couple of questions that I was going to ask you next, but out of all of those different, obviously key moments in your career from starting out in the UK, Middle East, Asia, over here, are there any key moments that really stand out as pivotal to what's got you in this seat today that you're in now? And also, what changes have you seen across the industry or not across all those different construction environments across the last 30 years?
Yeah, great question, Brody. Pivotal moments. Probably the biggest sliding door moment for me that sticks in my head that I wouldn't be here if it hadn't have happened. And this is an important thing for people to consider, because this is something that unfortunately happens to a number of people in their career, getting made redundant, and you think the world's fallen in on your head, and you'll get lots of people like I do now saying to you, it might be the best thing that ever happened to you. I reckon, the chances are you'll find yourself in a better place because of it. And at the time, you just can't see that, can you? You're like, yeah, thanks for saying that, but I just can't see it. And at that time, I was made redundant from a big contractor, and I thought I'm going to look for more of the same. I'm just going to look for another head of commercial role with another big contractor, but I was made redundant in October, and as everyone probably knows, that period from October, pretty much, Melbourne Cup Day through to Australia Day, dead. Try and find work in that period of time is now impossible. And again, another salutary lesson about keeping your options open, having an open mind to things. I'll be honest, I didn't have an open mind. It was my wife that said, John, you look at all opportunities. You've been out of work a little bit of time now, so you go and speak to anyone. And someone approached me and said, look, John, there's an opportunity for you to become a superintendent on a shopping centre development in Townsville. Would you be interested in that? To be quite frank, first thing response that came to my head was no. Why would I want to do that? But the thing that sat around that was, this is your opportunity to get into consulting. This gig's 2 days a week. You can do it standing on your head type of a thing. And I thought, well, yeah, why not? Give it a go. Not all I need to do is set myself up, get an ABN and some insurance, and away I go. And no looking back from that point in time. And quickly I got work from other locations and other clients, and when word got out that I was out there on my own, and that was the if I hadn't been made redundant, absolutely no chance I'd be where I am today. So for those of you that might be going through a similar situation at the moment, please keep an open mind. And generally, yes, it does turn out to be one of the best things that can ever happen to you.
Great advice.
In terms of the second part of your question, Brody, what changes have I seen in that time? I think one of the biggest changes, and this is something that has come up in conversation recently around advocacy and about reform and around changing things. There's a lot of talk today about labour hire and the issues with labour hire. Isn't it bad that we've got all this labour hire and the labour hire is getting abused by the bikies and all of this sorts of stuff? Yes, it is. Do we need to change that? Yes, we do. But first, you've got to understand why we find ourselves in that position that we find ourselves in today. And that speaks to one of the biggest changes that I've seen in our industry over time, which is, why do we find ourselves in that position? We find ourselves in that position for two reasons. One, we have seen progressively over time, clients seek to pass more and more risk onto industry. So industry's response to that is to mitigate that, is to parcel the work up, and in the process parcel the associated risk up and push that down the supply chain. The second part of that is that a change that we've seen is that we've seen greater. I didn't coin this word. I'm trying to remember who did coin this word. We've seen the projectification of our industry. And what do I mean by that? I mean that our industry's gone from a steady-ish pipeline of medium, largest projects that go along to this increasing predominance of bigger and bigger projects, mega projects, if you like. And our definition of mega projects has even changed. Not that long ago, we would talk about $1 billion project being a mega project. Do we talk about $1 billion project being a mega project nowadays? No, you're talking 5 to 10 probably is the start for mega projects. And what happens is, because of that, is you have less and less projects because they're bigger and bigger. And because of that, our pipeline becomes really lumpy. And what then happens is, if you're a business and you're trying to manage that, you go, well, if I have a blue collar workforce, how do I size that? Because if I don't get that gig there, I've got to wait another maybe 6 months until I get another chance of a gig down there. So you know what? I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to pass that problem down the supply chain again. I'm just going to get rid of my blue collar workforce. It's not worth the effort. And when we do that, then we start to introduce a whole bunch of other problems into our industry around who's training our workforce. And so I think those two things, the projectification and the transfer of risk, are the biggest root causes of the issues that we find ourselves in now. So if we want to address those problems, and thankfully we all do, we've got to go back to those fundamental reasons why we find ourselves where we are. We've got to try to address them, rather treat the actual disease, not the symptoms of the disease.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a really good pickup. Suds, did you have anything to sort of add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to go on to that point a little bit more as well. And I think it's really, really interesting, right? Because we see that at all different levels. And on some level, you have, technology coming in, trying to solve a few problems as well. Looking at that, do you see the change as a resumption of ownership further up the chain? Or do you see that as more support for the existing architecture of, we're still going to get down to a labor section, but let's support them better and from that perspective?
So I think it's going to be both, because ultimately, if you say that resumption is the way to go, and I think that there is a need to do a bit of that. I think there is an opportunity to do some of that. But I actually think that it's somewhere in between, that we have to provide the support to the supply chain, at least to begin with. Now, as we transition back to a new normal, but that transition is going to take quite a bit of time to unwind all of those sorts of things that I've talked about before. The projectification, are we going to get rid of that? I think we could do something around that. I think there are things that can be done to improve packaging of projects and how the size of packages that are brought to market. But I think to a degree, mega projects are here to stay in some form or other. So yeah, I think we've got to look at both of those sort of options.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, John, because I was lucky enough to be invited into a workshop earlier this week at RMIT, and the topic was injury prevention and injury management. And I landed on a table that we were talking about prevention. And so the question was, so tell me, what's your perception of prevention? And everybody was still in the management of an injury mindset that, well, and I just threw out a question there saying, so if we had to have a different contract model that could reduce stress, both physical and psychosocial, would that be the best preventative measure that we could bring into our industry, so we're not putting a band-aid on a broken arm every 5 minutes? And it's amazing, John, how what you're doing and what the ACA, and I'm keen to hear more about what you're doing from an ACA level, that we've got to change people's paradigm around what does good look like, that ultimately starts with the rules of engagement that are written into a contract that then sets people up for success or failure when you start digging a hole in a piece of ground to build the project.
100%, Brody. I mean, a lot of the issues in our industry come about because there's a fundamental misalignment of the interests of all the stakeholder groups. We don't do enough at a project level, at an industry level, to try to better align the interests of all the stakeholders. So at an industry level, so this is a conversation that I had with Minister Burke last year Minister Watt, who took over from Minister Burke at an IR level when the IR became a big news story, and there was a big focus on that. And I said, well, look, as well as dealing with the past and the present in terms of industrial relations, we've got a great opportunity now to look forward and to change that paradigm, exactly as you're saying, Brody. And I said, if you look at the three key stakeholder groups in industry, you've got clients, of which government is probably the biggest. And what do they want out of the industry? They want value for money, and they want certainty of project outcome. Then you look at the workforce and unions. What do they want? They want safe, secure, well-paid work. And then you come to us, you come to industry, you come to businesses. What do they want? We want a reasonable return on the investment that we put into our businesses. So you've got this sort of triangle thing going on there, and a bit like the famous time, cost, quality triangle in the industry. You can only ever have two. You can have fast and cheap, but if you have fast and cheap, you don't get any quality. That client, worker, industry triangle, generally speaking, we're lucky if we get one that gets what they want out of things. But why is that? Why can't we get, and to be honest, that is the secret sauce for fixing a lot of the issues in our industry. We need to get that alignment there so that everyone is getting what they're wanting. We're all aligned to achieving the outcomes that we're looking for. And that's not impossible. And thankfully, what Minister Watt agreed to was that the National Construction Industry Forum would be broadened, which it was. We brought on MBA and CCF. And now that is currently working towards developing a blueprint for a sustainable industry, which hopefully will be published back end of April, beginning of May.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And that's what's really interesting, right? Is that, change it's always going to go back up to the top. It's about, incentivizing, not just monetary, but incentivizing the industry from a state and federal level to make these changes, right? And that's what really, I guess, is great about the work that you're doing, and even the collaboration you're having with government as well. And I guess that segues us well into the ACA, right? So, I mean, talk to us a bit more about the ACA in general, and then, back around to what you've been talking about now and how you're, continuing to try and solve this and many other problems as well.
Sure. So the ACA has been around over 30 years. Actually, we had our 30th birthday last year. And initially, it was known as the Wall King Club, for those of you who remember the Wall King days at Leighton. And it was that sort of group of companies. It was more civil engineering focused. Today, has got a broad membership across both horizontal and vertical construction. It is, though, still very much the largest contractors in Australia. So we talk about our members constructing over 90% of all major infrastructure in Australia. And people ask me, why is that? That sounds a bit exclusive. Why only the top contractors? I guess part of the reason for that is that we just want to focus on advocacy. We're not here. All of our members are big enough and ugly enough to look after themselves. So they don't need member services. We are here purely and simply to advocate for reform of the industry on behalf of our members, to talk about the things that individually they would struggle to have those conversations or might not want to have those conversations for fear of impacting on their businesses. So that's all we do. We focus on advocacy, and we are we have this view that there are three key pillars, and we're focused on the sustainable construction industry. So it's pretty simple stuff. We want to create a more sustainable, better construction industry, and we think that there are essentially, or we started out believing that there are essentially three pillars to achieving a sustainable industry. You've got to have an improved industry culture, you've got to have sufficient capability, capacity, and skills, and you've got to have equitable and aligned commercial frameworks. So that's sort of talking to some of the stuff I just talked about there. In recent times, we've added a couple of overlays to that. We've added a environmental sustainability overlay to that, and we've also added a productivity overlay to all of that as well. So this is what guides our advocacy, and we are a national association. So we're talking to all of the jurisdictions. Thankfully, now there are a number of industry initiatives that bring those jurisdictions together and align them better. So it's not a case of just having to have the same conversation 5 or 6 times, which is quite exhausting and annoying, to be quite frank. So we have now things like the Construction Industry Leadership Forum, which was set up by ourselves, New South Wales Government and Victorian Government, that now the Queensland Government's on board, WA Government's on board, and the Commonwealth's on board. We've got the Construction Industry Culture Task Force, similar sort of membership driving change there. But despite the fact that, from a membership perspective, we could be accused of being a bit exclusive, I suppose, to really address that, what we have tried to do is be really inclusive in our advocacy and really reach out to other industry associations and work with other industry associations, because the problems that we're working on are all the same problems. We're all trying to fix the same thing. Brody's probably heard me talk before about when I first came into the role, it reminded me a bit that like that scene from Monty Python's Life of Brian, where you've got the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front, and ultimately we're all trying to achieve the same thing. And so if we work together, more closely together, we can achieve that. And so we're trying to play a role in bringing industry associations together. That's part of the reason for the creation of the event the first of which we had last year, with Foundations and Frontiers. This is, we've purposefully called this an industry forum, not an industry conference, not an industry event, an industry forum modeled on your COP Climate Summit, your Davos Economic Summit, which is all about bringing people together, the senior people within industry, to have a real good conversation and to hold ourselves accountable for trying to achieve a change. So I guess that's what we are trying to be, what we're trying to be about. I mean, it's an ongoing, it is an evolution. We've come a long way, and I think we've still got a way to go on that front. But that is the role that we see that we have.
John, can you give us a bit more insight into the role that ACA had in the development of our national construction strategy? Because three of the four elements that you mentioned there are in that strategy, but there's one in there looking at the better use of data. Because really, what you've described in a number of different instances where it's about collating, bringing people together, collaboration, and evidence-based solutions that can only be gathered through good use of data. What's your thoughts and insights on the poor use of data at this point in time based on our productivity commission's report? And what do you think we can do as an industry about better use of data across the sector?
Yeah. So the National Construction Strategy, we produced a report a couple of years ago called Nailing Construction Productivity. So, let's take a couple of steps back. I passionately believe that this year we will start to see some real fundamental change in our industry. First time in the nearly 40 years I've been in the industry, I'm really optimistic that we're going to see change.
Yep.
Why? Why do I believe that? Two fundamental things. The amount of infrastructure that we are being asked as a construction industry to build just keeps going up. Politicians don't like cutting projects, they like adding projects. So the amount of work that we are asked to build keeps increasing and increasing. And at the same time, the available workforce that we've got to deliver that infrastructure is going in the opposite direction. If for no other reason than the demographic time bomb finally exploding, which it is, and impacting the whole of the economy, not just the construction sector, we've got a whole bunch of other reasons that are stopping people. We're just tiring people out. People are retiring early. People are going, bugger that, I don't want to come and work 60 hours a week. There's a whole bunch of stuff, that other impediments to people coming into our industry, which we need to work on and are working on. But we've got this fundamental problem that we've got too much work and not enough people to deliver that work at a holistic level. Yes, we are seeing drop-offs in pipelines in various sectors and various jurisdictions, but more broadly, we have this problem. And what I'm seeing for the first time ever is the penny is starting to drop now with those key decision makers, that we cannot keep going on the way and delivering and doing construction the way that we've done it in the past. And that's not just here as well, actually. This is a global issue. And so you go, well, how do we address that? The lack of people versus the amount of work. Historically, what would we do? We'd stick people on boats and planes and bring them in. Not a solution anymore. Publicly, not an appetite for mass immigration anymore. We've got a housing crisis. We've got high cost of living. We've got floods. We've got bushfires. We locked everyone up in COVID. You know what? This isn't the attractive destination that it once was. So immigration, part of the solution, maybe, yeah, short term, but longer term, not really. So then you go on to, well, what else can we do? We can train people up. Well, of course, no one's ever going to disagree with training people. But who are we going to train? The economy is technically at full employment. Who are we going to train? So again, part of the solution, yes. Complete solution, no. The only single thing that will solve this problem is by getting more productive. Doing more with the people that we've already got. Not doing more with less. There's more than, we don't need to lay anyone off. There's more than enough work to go around. This is not about getting more productive to lay people off. This is getting more productive to keep up with it all. And so, and there, as I'm sure you both know, huge opportunity. Our industry, less productive now than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, Kevin was home alone in New York and we were sticking CDs into the dashboards of our cars. That's how long 30 years ago was.
Yeah.
And yet we're less productive. The gap in productivity growth in that period of time between us and other major industries, 33%. And you go, well, what does that mean, John? 33%, what does that mean? If you apply 33% to the gross value add for the construction industry, which is like the GDP for the construction industry in Australia, you get an annual opportunity of over $60 billion if we could close that gap.
Wow.
That's dollars, but you can convert that then into people, obviously. And so what we did in our Nailing Construction Productivity Report is say, well, actually, we know we need to get more productive. We actually know how to get more productive. We know all the things that we need to do. It's just there's a whole bunch of barriers in our way to realizing those. So we said we need a national construction strategy focused on removing those barriers. And thankfully, the Commonwealth, the federal government said, yeah, righto, we're on board with that. So Jim Bett's Department of Infrastructure said, righto, John, I'm going to give you an opportunity to pitch this to the Infrastructure Transport Senior Officials Committee meeting, which is all the heads of the departments of transport around the country, because that is where the Commonwealth has got the closest relationship from a funding perspective with the states. So flew down to Adelaide for a 15-minute meeting, made my pitch, just like I know you tech guys are very good at all that sort of stuff, and me not so. But anyway, they said yes. And we now are working on a national construction strategy, which has, as Brody says, has got 4 key components. It has a focus on workforce and culture, which has been led by New South Wales government. We've got a stream on procurement, which has been led by the Victorian government. A piece on modern methods of construction and innovation, which we were asked to lead. And then there's a piece on data, which Queensland is leading. So this is a very long-winded way of me finally answering your question, Brody. So data. So if we talk about productivity, yes, we've got the ABS statistics that notionally tell us how we're tracking. But you ask anyone, how does ABS calculate productivity? Even if you ask an economist, they'll go, can I come back to you on that one? And so you go, well, all right then, what chance have we got of improving productivity if we can't even calculate productivity, if we don't know what it means? So what we're looking at trying to do is, can we come up with 2 or 3 metrics that we all agree, they're indicators of productivity, and more importantly, we know how to calculate them. And then once we've done that, we go, righto, let's agree that we're going to collect that data. If required, we'll anonymize that data, but we will share that data and we'll start to benchmark our performance. Because back to your question, Brody, as an industry, as you know, we create massive amounts of data, huge amounts of data, and we use about that much of it because we are no good at collecting and sharing data. And that's where it's got to change, because I got asked a question just last week about AI, the thing that you know a lot about, a lot more than I know about. But what I do know is that AI relies on interpreting data. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to collect that data. You've got to be able to access that data. If you can't access that data, it ain't going to happen. So we've got to learn to walk to a certain extent before we can run. And I know you're all coming up with smart ideas about how we can accelerate that process. But we've got to get a lot smart about how we collect that data to be able to then be able to interrogate that data to give us all the smarts that will guide us in the direction that we need to go to get more productive, to get safer, and to do a whole range of things.
Well, and that's a really good segue into, again, conversations that we've had previous times. We've had with Helen Lingard and a project that we're looking at this year on decluttering construction. Because there's 2 elements to the data conversation. One is, how do we determine what is valuable data to collect that's of benefit to the delivery of a project? And then by qualifying data, and we declutter a lot of the noise that we get told we have to collect these data sets from projects that aren't really adding any value to anybody other than creating a shitload of jobs for people that I can't imagine being really motivation types of roles when you're just data entry situations. But once you've got a better quality of data coming into an environment that can be quickly scrutinized by AI, again, it's about accelerating people's decision-making process back out on the job, right? Have you had any conversations with anybody around? Because again, we need to scrutinize data, we need to mine data better, but what do we do about cleaning up the data that we're actually bringing into that data lake? Have you had any, or have you heard of any conversations around that decluttering component?
I'll be honest with you, Brody. Probably not, because I'm still stuck in the headspace of collecting it first. I can understand exactly the importance of what you're describing. It's just a focus on getting that process started, I suppose, is where our head's at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I'm really keen to sort of understand from your point of view as well the role you see technology playing in that. Right? I think it's AI is a very, very powerful tool. Data aggregation is very powerful as well, but it gets back to that example you put out before about starting from the top. And I think it's very hard for construction businesses at any tier to know what data to collect, whether it's for the industry or for themselves, if they aren't really sure of where the directive's going. I think that's a lot of the work that you're saying that you guys are doing. If teams are better armed with knowing what data they need to collect, both for themselves as a business, for their own continuity and efficiency, but also for the industry in general, that really will start to help with these sort of state and federal level conversations. Do you see that as a space where technology can come in and really help the industry?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's yes is the answer to that, but I think there's a cautionary tale here. If we look at building information modeling, BIM, as an example in our industry, BIM. How long has that been around for? It's over 20 years now, isn't it? It's a long time, and yet I know there's some companies and clients that are doing a great job in that. But if you look at an average across the industry, we still get excited when we see a 3D model on a computer screen, and which is what's BIM level now up to, I don't know, level 8 or something like that. I don't keep a track of that now, but we're probably still down at the 2 mark more broadly as an industry. So you've got to ask yourself, you got to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why, before we sort of talk about what are the lessons that can we learn about that? Because we don't want to find ourselves in that position again. We need to address that. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff around, a bit like I'm going to show my age again now. The thing about the video recorders and the compatibility VHS versus Betamax and the different standards and aligning on a standard. I think there's a bit of all of that. Then there's a bit of clients not seeing the value and not getting on board. And if the clients don't do it, the contractors go, well, why should we bother? Why should we invest the money? So there's a number of things there that I think lessons that can be learned from that whole process into this. But I start to see some companies taking a real fresh and innovative approach to this, or a good approach to this. I caught up with the owners of a construction company called Capital Group in Melbourne the other week, and they were talking about what they're doing, about how they are helping the supply chain. They want to go down that path. They recognize the restrictions in the supply chain, and they're basically saying, you know what, it's worth our while, even though we have to pay to give them the technology or give them access to the technology, and we've got to hold their hand as we go through it and all the rest of it. It's still worth our while in terms of the improved efficiency, the reduced downtime, the reduced wastage, the reduced defects, and all the rest of it. So there are signs of hope, but yeah, I think my main point there is that we need to look back and see why that failed. Well, not why it failed, but why BIM didn't take off in the way that everyone expected it to.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting call, and it goes back to sort of how you even got into the ACA, right? I think especially here in ANZ, you have a lot of strong industry professionals moving into the tech founder space. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the best value points that kind of comes back to the industry is people who already intimately understand the challenges and the problems, then going to help and solve it with technology. Deep Space Founders is a perfect example. Both Michael and Luke come from the BIM and design world, and their aim was not to add more complexity to the problem, was very much in line with what you were saying. They saw it the same way you did and said, we can actually get technology to unwrap all of this and move in a completely different direction. And so, I think it's similar to how your experience brought you into the ACI. I think industry professionals continuing to move into the technology space is our best hope of trying to solve these problems properly and in line with what the industry is looking for. That's great insight.
And just something to add there on what you were sharing, John. And again, I'm 45 years in the game, so I'm somewhat a product of the environment. But the thing that I really love about this time, this moment in history, is I've never experienced an appetite for wanting to adopt better ways of doing business than I've experienced in my 45 years. Right, getting back to 30, when you first started out, John, we used to have healthy margins on projects that were in double digit. Right, so stress, psychological stress, all these things that we're now battling with, we didn't seem to have the same number of 30 odd years ago when we had healthy profit margins, and so we were closer to that 3 stakeholder triangle 30 years ago than what we are today. And the thing that I really love, the 4 things that you've got in that national construction strategy are they're symbiotic. There's no one any more important than the other, right? And the fact that you've been able to pull the right people around the table and get the right stakeholders to identify those 4 key things, because and again, it's about evidence-based solutions. Let's not just, this could work. Let's look at the evidence. We have enough evidence to say a good AI digital tool going into the wrong culture with people with the wrong skill sets is not going to give us a good outcome. And so, and again, if the contractual model isn't set up right at the beginning of the project, that all these pieces of the puzzle come nicely together, that we get a clear picture of a good project outcome, we're going to be having this conversation in 10 years' time, and we'd probably miss the opportunity. But how, can you explain to us, John, how did we come to identifying those 4 key things that are now the focus of that national strategy that we've got backing from all the different stakeholder groups?
Good question, Brody. It was, it's just a lot of experience, I guess. A lot of people, talking, coming together and bouncing this off each other. Experience. A lot of people, I get asked quite a bit about how we haven't got a big team here, but we turn out a lot of thought leadership on subjects like this. And how do you do that? And to be honest with you, a lot of it's therapy for me. It's writing stuff down about what I've learned over the last 30 odd years. So some of it is my experience, but it's not just me. It is our members contributing through our working groups and the experience that they've had. It's our engagement with other industry associations and what they are experiencing in their sectors. It's engagement with the client, and it's also engagement with the unions as well. We talk a lot. There are people that say, we should just get rid of the unions. No, they're just the cause of all the problems. The unions, law-abiding unions, are entirely appropriate and serve a really valuable function within our industry. And the conversation with unions has now started to change significantly since last year, and there are a lot of really strong alignment across a range of areas, and valuable conversations that are really starting to happen about how we move our industry forward. So to summarize and answer your question, it really is a lot of input from lots of different stakeholder groups.
Yeah. No, and that's when you think about it. If you've got a problem on a job, you go and talk to the people who are the closest to the problem, right? And I'm sure you've had plenty of commentary and pats on the back, because I really admired your intestinal fortitude for having the right people at the forum last year, which included the unions.
Yeah,
They're a key stakeholder, right? And whether it's, and again, law-abiding organisations that have got their membership's best interests at heart, it can only be good for our industry.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it's a great point, Rory. And I really wanted to talk about the future. But before we get to that, there's a theme here as well. I think it's where Brody's passion comes from as well. It's where the union conversation kind of comes in as well, and it's safety, right? I think there's a really real world impact here of obviously productivity is a focus, but any time things sort of break down, especially in construction or these high labor kind of jobs, there's very real world impacts that come through from that. And that's where we saw that passion from Brody just before as well. So, you've got a really interesting lens where, working with some of the key members, and a lot of the work that they will do around safety will inevitably impact the entire industry. Talk to us a little bit about, what you see as a key focus in safety in the Australian construction sector, where you see things right now, and also just a little brief sort of idea of where you see safety in the future, as in how can we be better as an industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually, this one. There's been a lot of focus on safety, rightly so, over the last few decades, and I remember the transition into the concept of behavioural safety and how people's behaviours influence safety outcomes, and we went through a whole process around that. And I attended last year. It was a presentation by a guy, hopefully I remember his name, Matt Hallowell, from the States. And he's working with Helen Lingard.
He's part of Shine.
Yeah, part of Shine. And one of the things that really struck me about what he said was, if we look at, we've been very good at monitoring things like total recordable injury frequency rates, TRIFRs. And if you look at TRIFRs, there's been a steady decline down in that rate. And you go, good, that's a good outcome. But then you look at the fatality rate in our industry, and that has just done that. It hasn't moved. We're still killing people, unfortunately, at the same rate that we always have. And his view on that was that we need to change again. We need another step change in our focus on safety. And he has this great acronym that you can't forget. So hopefully I'll say this and I'll remember, and everyone else will remember. He says that we've got to focus on sticky risks. And you go, sticky? What does that mean? Shit that kills you. And you go, righto, that's pretty basic, isn't it? And he unpacks that and he says, well, what does that actually mean? We don't focus enough on high energy risk. And so he's got this concept around how we can better identify, mitigate, manage high energy risks. And I think that that's really quite interesting for me. And it's something safety is something I've been quite passionate about in my career. And I think that he's potentially on to something. But I think the next area, which touches off on your both of your passions, is, safety is absolutely one of those areas where we collect lots of data. And we actually probably do better in safety than any other aspect of our industry in terms of that data collection. So that is a prime opportunity for using AI to analyze that data and identify specific areas of concern that we should be focusing on.
Yeah.
So I actually think, and I'm not just saying this because you've invited me onto your podcast, but I actually think that AI, that is one of the first areas in terms of construction that I think construction will benefit from AI.
Yeah, well, and that's why I was so excited when we got the knock on the door from Deep Space last year, right? And maybe just from a listener's point of view, I've never held a safety professional role in my 45 years. I've been a supervisor or a superintendent. So safety has been one KPI that I've had to try and simultaneously manage, along with QA, environment, productivity, all the KPIs. And so I think that what I get passionate about, and I know you know this, John, because we've had plenty of coffees over it, it's the concept of get it right the first time. Get it right the first time. Because if we can improve the technical proficiency of our teams, that they can get their job right the first time, that cannot have a compounding effect on safety outcomes, right? Because it's what Matt talks about. It's that shit that can kill you, right? It's like, you know what? Falling from heights is our biggest killer in our industry, outside of people taking their own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing, I've had an interest in the concept of lean construction and a consultancy focused on lean construction. And one of the things that does, there's a tool called collaborative planning, Last Planner, which brings together, rather than having your planner stuck in a darkened room and feeding him pizza and churning out, these big long programs that no one looks at and they're out of date within two days type of stuff. It's a more holistic process that involves people and having conversations. Mm-hmm. And in terms of data and metrics, how you track how well you're doing with that is you measure a data set called planned progress complete. So in any given week, when you get to the end of the week, what percentage of what you planned to do did you actually do? Mm. I'm going to a bit of participation with you both here. Could you guess what the average planned percentage complete is on projects in Australia?
I'm going to guess 30%.
I was going to go somewhere in there as well. We'll bring it down. I'll go 20%.
God, you're very pessimistic. It's bad, but not that bad. It's 53%. So on average, we only do half the stuff that we plan to do. But this is where a safety element comes in, because what is the key cause of safety incidents on our sites? It is doing stuff that we didn't plan to do. When we plan to do something, we've got all the systems and procedures, and generally speaking, we do okay at that. Where it all turns to custard is when we go, we get halfway through the day, and well, we finished that stuff off, I can't do that bit now, but I can jump over there and do that bit. But we haven't actually planned to do that bit. It'll be all right. We'll be all right.
That's right.
Bingo. That's where we have all our problems. So there's a link between organized work, planned work, and safety as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's giving people a flexible framework. And this is where the decluttering piece comes in, John, I believe, that if you don't have too rigid a process or a framework on how work is conducted, and it comes back to what Matt's saying, like, what's the shit that can kill you? And what are the principles that people need to be reminded of when they go from one task to another that's unplanned, but we can remind people of the key principles of the 5 things that kill people in our industry. Mm-hmm. And if we can do that, and we can do it through data, that we know ahead of time, when you see this change, these are the critical risks you have to start identifying and putting controls in place for really, really quickly. And if we do that, we not only get a better safety outcome, we get a better productivity outcome. Mm. So the two aren't they're not siloed, right? The two are they're inexplicably linked, right? And if we can get that piece right, through some early insights, then we're probably, we can hang our boots up when we're ready to hang our boots up, knowing that we've possibly played a small part in changing the trajectory of our industry to something that's going to attract and retain the right people for generations to come, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that point you highlighted about safety, with it being what we collect the most data on, and then, relating that to the sort of plan and prepare example as well. You think to yourself, well, if those construction manager, whoever was sort of, is responsible for making those decisions, had a big board up somewhere in the office that said, this is what will happen if you just, haphazardly move into this space, there's more than likely going to be a very, very different approach that happens. It's sometimes an absence of data, or an absence of aggregated data, that makes life really, really difficult. And, like I said, we didn't want to really get into the product or anything with that. That is what excites me about Kai, which is the deep space AI agent, is that it just talks directly to the data model that a specific customer has. And so if we can continue to drive industry and educate them on what are the right metrics and what are the right data points to capture at a company level, at a project level, which obviously then goes up the chain, you're able to then use powerful modeling like Kai at a project and company level, but also at an industry level, to start making better decisions. It goes back to that first point you made around doing more with less. We don't need mass immigration. We don't need all of this. We need to empower our existing workforce to be able to make better decisions, right? And that's a part that, it's great with AI. And with the massive amount of data, it's not economical to think that somebody's going to be hired or sit in a room to crunch that and do it in enough time and get enough insights to actually have an impact, like saving somebody's life. You know what I mean? And so, that's a part that's really passionate. I think, as we continue to grow as a product, as a company, and as a customer base, and you've got ACA and a lot of other members working in that other direction, it just seems like, there's a great meetup point here to actually really drive some really good change in the industry that, is the difference between, certain members going home to their family or not at the end of the day. That's really what it's, trying to sort of work towards. Look, that's great. I think, safety
and I think
is sorry, of course, cover already.
And I think John, it's people going home to their families in a good state of mind.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, the mental health in our issues in our industry are unfortunately well documented.
Yeah. And maybe coming to a closing question, and you can choose to answer this or not. So I'll put a caveat on it. Do you find when it and I don't like to focus on safety, even though safety is an element of what we need to be addressing through better work design and productivity. Do you find that different stakeholders have got different targets they're aiming at? And what I mean by that is, industry, we don't want to kill people because it's bad for our logo. Whereas other stakeholders look at what's the cost of a long-term injury, so that there's possibly different things that people are focusing on based on what costs us more, but what incidents cost us in our ability to tender work, brand damage. Do you find there's a disconnect in some of the conversations that you're having on what people tend to want to put time and resources and effort into based on how they feel it impacts their organization or the industry in general?
I don't think so, Brody. I think safety. Everyone recognises that the safety is a non-negotiable. We should be. Everyone does have the right to go home at the end of a shift and uninjured, and probably where there's been the biggest shift is in that psychosocial space, and we're starting to see regulations being implemented around psychosocial health, which I think is very important. And I think, again, that is probably something back to a point you made earlier, Brody, about just the impact of some of the other things that happen in our industry on mental health. that will be another catalyst for doing something about all of that as well.
Yeah. And do you know if that's anything that Gabriella and the Culture Industry Task Force are looking at as part of their remit?
Oh, I mean, yes, in essence, I mean, the Construction Industry Culture Task Force is working on finalising a culture standard. That's out for consultation as we speak. That is due to be implemented very, very soon through government procurement. The idea is there, 3 key pillars. One, improved well-being, one, time for life, and one around diversity and inclusion. And they're all linked in. So time for life, we can't get, one of the reasons we struggle to attract more women is because there's no flexible working opportunities. It's long hours and the cultures, well, yeah, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, that one. But the well-being one is really focused on mental health more than physical health. And to inform the development of this and almost the business case for developing the culture standard, a report was commissioned called the Cost of Doing Nothing report, which basically identified what poor mental health is costing the economy currently, and more poor mental health in the construction industry. I can't remember the exact number, but it was between $7 and $8 billion every year is the cost.
Yeah.
So leaving aside the fact that we should be doing this anyway, because this is about people's health. There is a business case for it. There is a monetary reason why we should be doing something about this as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think and again, it's one of the reasons why we should have been doing it, because it was never its own standalone situation in legislation until recently, but it's always been part of the Act because you had to create a safe workplace for your workers, right? So it's both physical and psychosocial. But I think because of the rising costs around claims of this fast accelerating issue, and again, it's even with the workshop we did on Wednesday. It's like, well, a lot of people don't realise how psychological stress can contribute to back pain and lots of other physiological components that people aren't joining the dots. And again, so it's looking at what can we do better to give people earlier insights that we can identify those stress factors before the stress factors become something more concerning.
Yeah.
So, but did you have anything else, Suds?
Yeah. So to wrap up, I wanted to sort of move to the future. I think everything we've been speaking about has been moving in that direction, and like you mentioned before, is leaving a legacy, individually, but also collectively as organizations and industries. So, without getting too detailed here, I'm feeling confident about the future of the construction industry in Australia, and I think one interesting one is that are there any lessons that we should be learning that you're still mindful that we are not quite looking at closely enough?
Okay. Well, the first part of the question, yes, I'm incredibly optimistic. And if people want to understand why in more detail, I wrote a LinkedIn post at the start of this year where I talked about this year being the Chinese year of the snake, and that is all about shedding skin and renewal. And I think that it's quite appropriate that this is the year of the snake, because I think this is the year that the industry will start to shed that old skin. And the reason why is back to the issue that there is this dawning realization, pennies dropping left, right, and center around we can't keep going on the way we are. We all governments won't get the projects that they want, private sector clients won't get the projects they want, companies won't get the people that they need. We have to change. So yes, incredibly optimistic, but it needs everyone to play their part. Everyone that's listening to this podcast, by virtue of the fact that you're interested in listening to someone like me waffle on for so long, shows that you are interested in the industry, and everyone has the ability to influence change, however small that might be, by challenging the status quo, questioning why why are we doing it like this? Why can't we do it like something else? In terms of lessons learned, that's an interesting one. I think we can always learn from others. I'm quite often asked, can we learn from any other international jurisdictions from a construction standpoint? You know what? I'm not too sure about that. I think we're all at a similar level in terms of where we are. We're all realizing we're in deep shit. We've got a problem to solve. I actually think Australia could lead the way. I think that we could become an exemplar for other jurisdictions to say, that's what we need to do. And that's what I'm really passionate about trying to achieve.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all with you on that one, mate, because we're big enough to influence, but small enough to pivot.
Yes.
As a market.
Exactly. Yeah. That's just lovely feedback, right? I think it's a great way for us to wrap up as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure, Jon, and an honor to have you on and to have you share your insight. I think there's a lot of great points that we talked about. If anybody wants to find out more about Jon, the ACA, and what he's doing, like he's mentioned, LinkedIn, the ACA website, make sure you consume this podcast where you find all good podcasts. Thank you, Brody. Thank you, Jon. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Sid.